I hadn't planned on seeing her that night. My steps were light as I climbed the familiar stone path to my friend's house, expecting the usual easy laughter, the clatter of video games, and the smell of leftover pizza. Instead, when the door opened, it wasn't my friend standing there. It was his mother. She smiled, soft but knowing, the kind of smile that carried both welcome and a touch of mischief. The glow from the hallway light fell across her face, highlighting the graceful lines of maturity, the warmth in her eyes. For a second, I forgot how to greet her. "Hi, come in," she said, her voice low and steady, with that unhurried rhythm people only gain with age. I stepped forward, and, as I did, her hand brushed my arm lightly to guide me inside. That single touch, so casual, so natural, left behind a quiet trail of warmth on my skin. The house felt different without my friend. Quieter, more intimate somehow. The air held the faint scent of her perfume, something floral but subtle, like jasmine carried on a summer breeze. She closed the door gently behind us, and the click of the latch made the world outside feel very far away. "He's not home yet," she explained, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But you're welcome to wait. It's been a while since we actually talked." The way she said it, like she wanted the chance, stirred something in me. I nodded, trying to play it cool, but inside, my chest tightened with a strange anticipation I couldn't name. She led me toward the living room, her steps light but graceful, and I found myself noticing details I never paid attention to before. The curve of her shoulders, the elegance of her posture, the quiet confidence in the way she moved. She wasn't just my friend's mom. In that moment, she was simply a woman. We sat across from each other, the lamp casting a warm golden glow over the room. She asked about my studies, my plans, my thoughts about the future. Her questions didn't feel like small talk. They felt intentional, like she was genuinely interested. And the way she listened, eyes steady on mine, head tilted slightly, lips curved in the faintest smile, made me feel as though my words mattered more than they ever had before. At one point, she laughed at something I said. Not a polite chuckle, but a rich, unguarded laugh that filled the quiet space between us. The sound lingered, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to hear it again. The minutes slipped by unnoticed, carried on the current of an unexpectedly easy conversation. Yet beneath the calm surface, I could sense something else, an unspoken tension, a quiet awareness that neither of us seemed ready to name. It was just the two of us in that softly lit room, separated only by a small table, but it already felt like the distance between us was narrowing. She moved with a kind of ease that felt deliberate, as though every small action carried intention. When she asked if I wanted tea, I agreed without thinking, maybe because it gave me more time in her presence, maybe because I couldn't imagine saying no to her just then. The clink of porcelain filled the kitchen as she prepared it. I sat at the table, watching the way the lamplight played along her features. There was a grace to her, the kind you don't find in people my age, grace earned by living, by carrying joys and burdens with equal strength. She placed the teacup in front of me, her fingers brushing against mine for the briefest moment as she let go. That small contact was nothing, and yet everything. My chest tightened, my pulse tripped. She either didn't notice, or she noticed and chose not to mention it. We began with simple things, the weather, my classes, her work. But slowly, almost seamlessly, the conversation slipped into deeper waters. She asked about my plans after graduation, about whether I knew who I wanted to be. There was no judgment in her tone, only curiosity. "I used to think I had it all figured out at your age," she said, stirring her tea slowly. "But life has a way of changing the path under your feet. You think you're walking one road, and suddenly you realize you've been on another all along." Her words carried weight, the kind of weight you don't really expect until someone older places it in your hands. I nodded, trying to hide how much her honesty affected me. I told her about my doubts, The restless nights when I wondered if I'd chosen the right direction, if I was good enough to chase what I wanted. Speaking it aloud felt strangely easy with her, as if she created a space where honesty wasn't just welcome, it was safe. She listened with the kind of attention most people reserve for secrets. No interruptions, no distracted glances at her phone. Just her eyes on mine, steady and warm, as though my uncertainty mattered to her in a way it hadn't mattered to anyone else. At one point, her laughter bubbled up again, soft and musical, when I made a self-deprecating joke about being hopeless at making decisions. She leaned forward slightly, her hand resting for a moment on the table, just close enough that if I had moved mine an inch, we would have touched. The room seemed smaller, the walls quieter, as if the entire house leaned in to listen. Her perfume drifted again in the air, faint but steady, weaving itself into the moment. I caught myself staring at her lips as she spoke, quickly looking away, but the image lingered. We weren't just talking anymore. We were sharing something unspoken, something neither of us dared to acknowledge directly. In the glow of that quiet living room, with only the ticking clock breaking the silence, I realized this was no ordinary conversation. It was the beginning of something far more delicate and far more dangerous. The house had grown so quiet that every small sound seemed louder. The faint tick of the clock on the wall, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink when she set her teacup down on the saucer. Our conversation slowed, drifting into silences that didn't feel awkward but heavy, charged with something neither of us dared name. She leaned back slightly in her chair, studying me with a thoughtful expression. It wasn't the way a friend's mother usually looked at you. It was slower, deeper, as if she were searching for something beyond my words. I shifted under her gaze, trying to hide the flutter in my chest. And then she leaned closer across the small table, closing the space between us until I could see the fine strands of hair that had slipped loose around her face, the faint shimmer of light against her lips. Her voice dropped, quiet and deliberate, a whisper that seemed meant only for me. "You're too young to know this until tonight." The words landed like a secret being entrusted to me. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I tried to smile, to make light of it. "Know what?" I asked softly, though my voice wavered. But she didn't answer right away. She just held my eyes, her lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile that was both kind and mysterious. The silence stretched, and in it, I felt my pulse race in my ears. I realized then that it wasn't about the words themselves. It was the way she said them, low, almost tender, as though she had pulled me into a world only she could open. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the table, and when I shifted, mine came close enough that the air between our fingers felt alive. I thought I saw her glance at them, just for a flicker of a second, before lifting her eyes back to mine. "Some things," she finally said, her whisper almost brushing against my skin, "can't be explained. They have to be felt." Her voice carried warmth and weight, a softness wrapped around something far more dangerous. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, my heart beating faster than I wanted her to notice. Every instinct told me to step back, to laugh it off. But another voice inside me, the one that had been quietly awakening ever since I walked through her door, urged me to stay in this moment, to not look away. I could feel the heat of her nearness, the faintest breath against my cheek, as though the air itself was shared between us. The simple closeness carried more electricity than anything I'd ever known. And yet, she didn't move further. She pulled back slightly, her expression softening, almost as if she regretted how far the moment had gone. But the words lingered, wrapping themselves around me, changing the air between us forever. From that whisper on, I knew we had crossed an invisible line. The silence after her whisper lingered, thick enough to almost press against my chest. She must have sensed it too, because she stood and smoothed the fabric of her blouse, her composure returning with a soft smile. "Come," she said gently. Let's get some air. The night is too beautiful to waste indoors. I followed her through the back door into the garden, and the world shifted. The cool night air kissed my skin, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Moonlight spilled over the path, painting everything in silver and shadow. She walked ahead of me, her steps unhurried, the hem of her dress brushing lightly against her calves. There was a serenity in the way she moved, as though the night itself bent to her rhythm. When she turned back to me with a smile, I felt something loosen in my chest. We walked side by side along the narrow stone path, our shoulders close but not touching. She folded her arms loosely across her chest, then let them drop again, as if she couldn't quite settle. "Do you ever think about time?" she asked suddenly, her voice thoughtful. "How quickly it slips by when you're not paying attention." I hesitated before answering. "Sometimes. I guess I worry more about the future than the past." She nodded, her gaze lifted toward the stars. "That's the gift of being young. You look forward. But when you get to my age," her words trailed off softer now, "you start looking back, wondering what you missed, what you left unsaid." There was something in her tone, an ache, quiet but unmistakable, that pulled at me. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to let her know she wasn't alone in that moment. But I held back, afraid to break the fragile balance between us. Still, the distance shrank. Our arms brushed once, lightly, almost by accident. Neither of us moved away. The second time it happened, the contact lingered skin against skin, small and steady. A rush of warmth spread through me, and for a heartbeat, I swore she felt it too. The garden was alive with quiet sounds, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of a night bird, the faint hum of crickets. Each sound seemed to frame the silence between us, a silence that said more than words could manage. She slowed her steps and finally stopped near a flowering bush heavy with blossoms. Moonlight caught the lines of her face, softening them, making her look both timeless and vulnerable. She turned to me, her eyes luminous in the silver glow. "You don't realize it yet," she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself, "how rare it is to be truly seen." I wanted to answer, to tell her that I saw her now more clearly than ever before, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let the silence speak, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, my heart pounding in time with the quiet pulse of the night. In that garden, beneath the wide sky, it felt as though the world had folded down to just the two of us. When we stepped back inside, the warmth of the house seemed heavier than before, almost thick with the silence we carried in from the garden. She closed the door softly, as if careful not to break the fragile mood that had followed us indoors. Neither of us spoke at first. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled tick of the clock in the living room. She set her hand briefly on the back of the sofa, steadying herself before turning toward me. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, my voice softer than I expected. "For listening." Her eyes flickered down, then back up again. "It's been a long time since someone just let me be honest without trying to fix me or brush it off." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. I wasn't used to hearing her sound uncertain. My friend's mom had always carried herself with such quiet authority, so sure of her place in every room. And yet now, she seemed smaller somehow, like the weight of her own honesty had left her exposed. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to thank me, that I would listen to her forever if she let me. But before I could say anything, she closed the distance between us. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, until her palm rested against my cheek. Warm, gentle, almost trembling. The touch froze me in place. Her thumb brushed lightly along my jawline, a motion so tender it felt deliberate, though she might not have meant it that way. My breath hitched, and I knew she could feel it. "It's strange," she murmured, almost to herself. "You remind me that I'm still alive." Her words sank into me, heavy and intimate. My chest tightened, and for a heartbeat, I didn't know whether to step closer or pull away. But I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. The space between us had collapsed into nothing. I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume, feel the warmth radiating from her skin. My own hand lifted instinctively, hovering before it finally settled over hers where it cupped my face. Her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised I hadn't pulled back. But then they softened, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just attraction, but relief. As though she had been holding something inside for too long and had finally let it surface. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of our breathing. Hers calm but shaky, mine uneven and urgent. The clock ticked, steady and indifferent, marking time in a moment that felt suspended outside of it. I wanted to speak, to tell her what her touch meant to me. But no words could carry the weight of what I felt. So I simply let her hand linger, let the warmth of it anchor me in a moment I already knew I'd never forget. And though she pulled back after only a few seconds, the ghost of her touch stayed with me, echoing in every corner of my chest. After that fleeting touch, the room felt charged in a way I hadn't anticipated. The light from the lamp pooled softly across the carpet, turning the edges of the room into shadow. She sat on the sofa, her hands folded loosely in her lap, and I remained standing for a moment, unsure whether to move closer or give her space. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching, and I realized with a jolt that she didn't need words. We both knew something had shifted, though neither of us had said aloud. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured, her voice barely above the hum of the quiet room. There was a softness in it, a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "I just want you to know I appreciate this, your company, your honesty. I've been carrying too much alone." I stepped closer, slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle around us. My hand hovered near hers, unsure whether to reach, until finally I let it rest lightly over hers. Her fingers twitched against mine, not pulling away, not quite interlacing, but close enough that our warmth touched. It was a delicate line we were walking, suspended between propriety and something far more intimate. Yet neither of us flinched. Instead, the quiet pressed in, holding us in place. Her eyes softened, glistening faintly in the lamplight, and I felt the air between us thrum with unspoken words. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I could carry some of her weight, that I wanted to be there for her, but the right words felt impossibly heavy. Instead, I let the silence speak, letting my gaze and my steady presence say everything I couldn't voice. She exhaled slowly, almost a sigh, and for a moment leaned just slightly toward me. Not too close, not enough to overstep, but just enough that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. My heart raced, every nerve alert, and yet it was calm, grounded by the mutual understanding that passed between us. "It's strange," she said quietly, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips, "to meet someone who sees you without judgment, who doesn't run away when you're complicated." I nodded, my hand still resting near hers. "You're not alone," I whispered. "Not tonight." Her lips curved in a faint, almost shy smile. She didn't move away. The distance between us had collapsed, replaced by a delicate, unspoken promise. The kind of closeness that doesn't need words to be understood. We stayed like that for several minutes, just holding the space between us. Every glance, every subtle shift of weight carried meaning. Her hand finally moved slightly to rest atop mine, and my pulse spiked. Not with shock, but with the quiet joy of being fully seen. That night, I realized the most powerful moments aren't shouted or declared. They're whispered, felt, and understood in silence. And as I looked in her eyes, I knew we had crossed a threshold together, one that would change how we saw each other forever. The night had deepened, shadows stretching across the quiet house, when I realized it was time to leave. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was reluctant to let me go. She followed me, her presence calm but insistent, a gentle gravity pulling me back even as I tried to step forward. At the threshold, she paused. The moonlight streaming through the doorway fell across her face, softening her features, highlighting the lines of experience that only made her more beautiful, more real. She looked at me with a gaze that held everything we hadn't said. Every glance, every touch, every silent confession. "You don't have to go just yet," she murmured, almost a whisper, but her words carried the weight of everything between us. I hesitated, caught in the tension that had been building since I walked through the door hours ago. I should, I said softly, though my voice lacked conviction. She smiled faintly, a tender, knowing smile. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to the same low, intimate tone she had used before. "Now you know." The words brushed my ear like a secret, and I felt her warmth close in, the faintest pressure of her hand against my arm. My breath hitched, the hairs on my neck rising at the proximity, but I didn't move away. Somehow, in that moment, I knew that we didn't need to speak of what knowing meant. It was enough that it existed, shared, and understood between us. Then she did something small, deliberate, and unforgettable. She pressed her lips lightly against my cheek, a soft, fleeting kiss that carried more meaning than 1,000 words. Her hand lingered at my arm just long enough to ground me in the memory before retreating gently. I stood there, frozen for a heartbeat, feeling the echo of her touch ripple through me. The world outside the door suddenly seemed sharper, colder, brighter, but I carried the warmth of her presence with me as I stepped out. She watched me go, her eyes soft, almost wistful, but filled with something I couldn't name: pride, fondness, desire, or simply the relief of having shared a moment that neither of us would forget. The walk home was quiet, each step accompanied by the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, replaying her voice, her touch, her gaze. It wasn't confusion, not exactly. It was the quiet clarity that comes when a secret is acknowledged, when an unspoken bond has formed that will linger long after the night ends. That night, I realized that some connections don't need labels, declarations, or explanations. They exist in whispers, in touches, in silences that speak louder than words ever could. And as I climbed into bed, I knew that everything between us, the tension, the warmth, the quiet intimacy, would remain with me, shaping the way I saw her and myself forever. The house behind me was still, silent, and in that quiet, I carried the knowledge that tonight had changed us both, leaving a mark that would never fade.